I was a witness to perfection. Last night, I watched an angel's corpse twitch in its coffin, and I knew that witness itself was a kind of death. When does observation become a form of suicide? My name is Tertius 9 Sigma. I was a third-tier tech-adept of the Martian Mechanicus, assigned to vault Seraphim beneath the Palace of Terror. For 47 years, I maintained the environmental systems that preserve the honored dead. Temperature -273, 14 degrees Celsius, humidity 0%, atmospheric pressure 0 bars, the void made manifest in a tomb. I knew these numbers the way other men know prayer. I recited them in binary cant each morning, each evening, each shift change for 17,150, 5 rotations of this ancient, groaning world. I believed in the precision of my work. I believed that in these perfect measurements, I performed a sacred duty. The Omnissiah speaks through mathematics, and I was fluent in his language. The vault housed 147 stasis caskets. I knew each of them. Casket 17 contained Lord Commander Macharius's right hand, severed at the Battle of Crux. Casket 92 held the desiccated heart of Saint Celestine, recovered after her first documented resurrection. Casket 1, always Casket 1, held the body of Sanguinius, 9th Primarch, the great angel, dead for 10,000 years. I had walked past Casket 1 6 times per shift for 47 years, 102,930 walks. I had performed system checks on its containment field 8,311 times. I had calibrated its energy matrix, replaced its fusion coils, monitored its quantum lock for any fluctuation greater than 0.001% deviation from baseline. I had never looked inside. This was not regulation. This was faith. The other tech adepts, the servitors, the visiting Mechanicus inspectors, they all looked. They pressed their faces to the viewing portal and gazed upon the perfect, golden features of a being who had walked among the Emperor himself. They recorded. They analyzed. They worshipped through observation. I did not look because I understood that some things must remain unknown to preserve their sacredness. The moment you measure divinity, you reduce it to data. I was the guardian who kept the mystery intact even from myself. Last night, I looked. It was shift rotation 17,156. The chronometer read Euro 3722 Imperial Standard. I was alone in the vault. Alone save for the dead, which in the Imperium is the most common form of companionship. I was performing my final check before the day cycle began, running my mechadendrites across the diagnostic panels, recording the numbers that had become my rosary. Casket 1's power consumption had increased by 0.003%. I stared at the reading for 11 minutes and 41 seconds. My optical augmetics captured every digit. My cogitator implants ran probability matrices. The variance was within acceptable parameters. Stasis fields fluctuate. Quantum states are inherently unstable at the microscopic level. This was nothing. This was noise in the data. I recalibrated the sensors. The reading persisted. I checked the fusion coil temperature, elevated by 0.2 degrees Kelvin. I checked the containment field harmonics. The resonance frequency had shifted by 0.7 Hz. Individually, each anomaly was meaningless. Collectively, they formed a pattern. Something inside Casket 1 was drawing power. Something inside Casket 1 was warming. Something inside Casket 1 was changing state. I should have reported this. Standard protocol demanded immediate notification to the Vault Master, who would alert the custodian guard, who would seal the chamber and summon the High Lords themselves if necessary. A fluctuation in Sanguinius's stasis field was not a maintenance issue. It was a theological crisis. I did not report it. Instead, I approached the casket. My footsteps echoed in the vast, empty chamber, each footfall a small betrayal of every principle I had built my life upon. The casket was 3 meters tall, 2 meters wide, wrought from auramite and inscribed with high Gothic prayers that I had memorized without ever reading. The viewing portal was a circle of armor glass, perfectly clear, positioned at chest height for an unaugmented human. For 47 years, I had maintained this casket without looking inside. For 47 years, my faith had been the not looking. Now I stood before it, and I realized that faith and cowardice are sometimes indistinguishable. I looked. The great angel lay in perfect repose. His armor was the color of arterial blood, each plate a masterwork of artificer craft. His wings, Emperor's mercy, his wings, spread beneath him like a shroud of white feathers, each filament preserved in the moment of his death. His face was serene, beautiful in a way that made my augmented eyes ache. Even dead, even frozen in stasis for 10 millennia, Sanguinius radiated a nobility that made my chest constrict with something I could not name. I looked, and I understood why the others had always looked. Beauty like this demands witness. But I had not come to worship. I had come because the numbers were wrong. I activated my advanced optical suite, cycling through spectrums invisible to human sight. Infrared, ultraviolet, X-ray, quantum resonance imaging. I examined the angel's body with every sensor at my disposal, recording data with a precision that felt increasingly like desecration. His body temperature -273, 14 degrees Celsius, unchanged. His cellular structure frozen at the molecular level, unchanged. His stasis field integrity 99,99997%, within acceptable parameters. But the power draw continued. Olozan and 3% above baseline and rising, slowly, infinitesimally, but rising. I watched for 6 hours and 17 minutes. During that time, the power consumption increased to 0.05% above baseline. The containment field harmonics shifted by another 1-2 Hz. The fusion coil temperature rose by 0.4 degrees Kelvin. Something was happening. Something was waking. At 0438 I saw movement. It was not the movement of flesh. It was not the movement of anything that lived. It was the movement of quantum states collapsing, of probability waves selecting reality from the infinite possible realities. Through my quantum resonance imaging, I watched a single atom in Sanguinius's left hand shift from its frozen position. The displacement was 0.01 millimeters. It took 0.3 seconds. Then another atom moved. Then another. I recorded everything. My memory, cores filled with data. My hands, both flesh and mechadendrite, trembled against the viewing portal. I was watching something that should not be possible. Stasis is the suspension of time itself. What was frozen in stasis remains frozen until the field is deactivated. But the field was active. I had checked 99,99997% integrity. And yet, the angel was moving. Atom by atom, molecule by molecule. A process so slow that it would take centuries to register at the macroscopic level. But it was happening. It was real. I should have reported this. I should have fled the chamber and sealed it behind me. I should have done many things that I did not do. Instead, I opened my toolkit and began running diagnostic algorithms on the stasis generator itself. I worked with the methodical precision that had defined my existence. I isolated each component. I analyzed each subsystem. I searched for the malfunction that would explain what I was witnessing. There was no malfunction. The stasis field was operating at design specifications. The power supply was stable. The quantum lock was engaged. Every system reported nominal function. The angel was waking from within a perfectly functional stasis field. At 16:09, I committed my first act of true heresy. I disabled the automatic logging system. From that moment forward, no record would exist of what occurred in Vault Seraphim. No data stream would report to the Vault Master. No alarm would sound if further anomalies manifested. I had made myself the sole witness to whatever was happening. I told myself this was prudence. That reporting an anomaly without understanding it was irresponsible. That I needed more data before I could file a complete report. I was lying to myself. Even then, I knew I was lying. The truth was simpler and more terrible. I wanted to see. After 47 years of deliberate blindness, I had looked upon divinity, and now I could not look away. The shift change came. I logged my report as normal. All systems nominal, no anomalies detected. The lie came easily. I had never lied in a status report before. The words felt weightless in my vocalizer, as though dishonesty required no effort at all. I returned to my habitation unit. I consumed my nutrient paste. I performed my maintenance prayers to the Omnissiah. I lay in my charging alcove for the regulations 6 hours and 13 minutes. I did not sleep. I reviewed the data, over and over. I watched the recorded quantum imagery of Sanguinius's hand, watching atoms dance in their infinitesimal migration. I analyzed the numbers. I built predictive models. I calculated the rate of change. At the current rate, Sanguinius's body would achieve molecular mobility in approximately 843 years. Full cellular function in 12,000 years. Consciousness in 27,000 years. These numbers were absurd. They were impossible. They meant nothing. And yet they were all I had. When I returned to Vault Seraphim for my next shift, the power consumption had increased to 0.09% above baseline. The pattern was accelerating. I resumed my vigil at the viewing portal. I watched. I recorded. I measured. The hours passed like prayers in an empty church, each one identical, each one hollow. The other tech-adepts noticed nothing. They performed their duties with the same mechanical precision they always had. They walked past Casket 1 without seeing what I saw. Without knowing what I knew, I envied them. I envied their ignorance with an intensity that surprised me. On the third day, I noticed the smell. This should have been impossible. The vault was a hermetically sealed environment. The atmospheric processors filtered out all organic particulates. The temperature was maintained at 15.7 degrees Celsius. Nothing should smell. But I smelled it anyway. Faint, barely detectable even with my augmented olfactory sensors. The smell of ozone and copper and something else. Something that reminded me of the incense burned in the great cathedrals of Mars, but sweeter, cleaner, more alive. I traced the scent to Casket 1. I ran a full atmospheric analysis. The air composition was unchanged. Nitrogen 78.09%, oxygen 20.95%, argon 0.93%. Trace gases within normal parameters. No foreign particulates detected. The smell existed only in my perception. This was when I first understood that I was changing. That witness was not a passive act. That observation of the impossible transforms the observer. I began to notice other changes. Small things, subtle degradations in my routine. I had always maintained my augmetics with religious precision. Each morning I would perform the rite of maintenance, cleaning each mechadendrite, recalibrating each sensor, anointing each joint with sacred unguents while reciting the proper blessings. The ritual took exactly 43 minutes. I had performed it every day for 62 years, since the day I received my first augmetic at age 14. On the fourth day of my vigil, I forgot to perform the rite. I only realized this when I arrived at the vault and found a microscopic speck of dust on my primary optical lens. It took me 11 seconds to understand what had happened. I had simply not done it. The habit that had been as natural as breathing had vanished from my routine without me noticing. I performed the rite immediately, there in the vault, kneeling before Casket 1. But it felt different. The words of the blessing seemed hollow. The movements seemed theatrical. I was performing a memory of devotion, not devotion itself. When had this happened? When had the ritual become merely ritual? I tried to remember the last time I had felt the presence of the Omnissiah during the rite of maintenance. The last time the words had carried meaning beyond their phonetic value. I could not recall. The memory simply wasn't there, as though it had been deleted from my consciousness without leaving even the ghost of its absence. This should have terrified me. I was a tech-adept of the Mechanicus. Faith in the Omnissiah was not optional. It was the foundation upon which my entire identity was constructed. Instead, I felt only a distant, clinical interest, as though I were observing someone else's crisis of faith through layers of insulating glass. I began to catalogue my changes with the same methodical precision I applied to monitoring the angel's awakening. I created a new data file, encrypted and isolated from the Mechanicus noosphere, where I recorded my symptoms. Day 4 missed daily maintenance rite. Experienced no anxiety regarding this omission. Noticed that the smell from Casket 1 has intensified. Atmospheric analysis continues to show no anomalies. Conclusion: the change is in me, not the environment. Day 16. Spent 14 hours at the viewing portal instead of regulation 12. Failed to notice the time differential until shift change alarm sounded. Day 70. Realized I have not eaten in 31 hours. Felt no hunger. Consume nutrient paste only when I consciously remembered the biological necessity. Day 80. The other tech-adepts sound different. Their voices in the cant seem distant, as though transmitted through failing Vox equipment. I ran a diagnostic on my auditory sensors. They function at 100% efficiency. The distance is perceptual, not mechanical. Day 9. And I looked at my hands, both flesh and steel, and did not recognize them as mine. The sensation lasted for 47 seconds before familiarity reasserted itself. Day N. I have stopped performing any rituals I can avoid without being noticed. The binaric prayers, the anointing of the terminals, the blessing of the fusion coils. None of it matters anymore. I speak the words when others are present. Alone, I am silent. I should have been afraid. I should have sought help. The Mechanicus has entire orders dedicated to combating the scrapcode corruption of the mind. I could have reported myself. I could have submitted to purification rites. But I didn't want to be purified. I wanted to understand, because Sanguinius was still changing, and so was I, and I began to suspect that these two processes were not coincidental. The power draw had reached zeros and 23% above baseline. The rate of increase was no longer linear, it was exponential. My predictive models had to be recalculated daily. What I had thought would take millennia might take only centuries, then decades. The curve steepened with every measurement. And there was something else. Something I could only see through the quantum resonance imaging. The angel's body was beginning to show patterns in its atomic movement. Not random thermal agitation, but organized. Structured. His atoms were forming coherent wave functions. They were synchronizing. I had read about this phenomenon in Forbidden Mechanicus texts. It was called quantum coherence, the state where multiple particles act as a single system, behaving with impossible coordination across distances that should prohibit information transfer. It was the mechanism that allowed cogitators to think, that allowed the human brain to generate consciousness from mere meat and electricity. Sanguinius's body was becoming coherent. His atoms were learning to think together again. He was not waking. He was remembering how to wake. I shared this realization with no one. Instead, I began to research. The vault contained a small cogitator terminal for maintenance logs and system diagnostics. I used it to access the Mechanicus archives, searching for any documentation of stasis field anomalies, Primarch biology, quantum resurrection phenomena. I found nothing useful in the official records. The Mechanicus does not speculate about Primarchs. They are simply recorded as existing, as being superior, as being beyond analysis. To question them is to question the Emperor. To question the Emperor is heresy, but there are always unofficial records. Data that exists in the margins of the noosphere, fragments of research deemed too sensitive for general distribution. I had never accessed these before. My clearance level was insufficient. My need was non-existent. Now I had need, and I discovered that clearance levels are more permeable than I had believed. A few careful queries, a few exploited backdoors in systems I maintained but had never questioned. The Mechanicus hoards knowledge, but it hoards it inefficiently, and inefficiency creates opportunity. I found a fragment, a partial research log from Magos Biologus Archoi, dated 8076, M32, approximately 8,000 years ago, the subject's cellular analysis of Primarch tissue samples, the conclusion impossible to definitively state, but buried in the technical minutiae, I found one sentence that made my primary heart skip a beat. Subject tissue demonstrates persistent quantum entanglement with unknown source, suggesting that Primarch biology exists partially outside conventional spacetime, maintaining coherence with some fundamental template or origin point even after death. I read that sentence 147 times. I analyzed every word. I cross-referenced every technical term. The implications were staggering. If Primarch tissue maintained quantum coherence after death, then death itself might not be a permanent state for them. They would exist in superposition, simultaneously dead and alive, waiting for the probability wave to collapse in the correct direction. And what collapses probability waves? Observation, measurement, witness. I looked at the viewing portal of Casket 1. I thought about 47 years of deliberately not looking. 47 years of maintaining the angel in a state of unobserved death. 47 years of keeping the wave function collapse through the simple act of not checking whether it had changed. Then I had looked, and reality had begun to re-evaluate what was possible. I laughed. The sound echoed in the vast chamber, bouncing off walls that had not heard laughter in recorded history. It was not a sane laugh. I knew this even as it escaped my vocalizer. But the absurdity was too perfect, too elegant. I had killed Sanguinius by looking at him. No, that wasn't quite right. I had unkilled him. I had reminded the universe that the question of his death was still open, still subject to observation, still capable of yielding a different answer, if examined carefully enough. The angel was waking because I was watching him wake. And what was happening to me? I went back to my encrypted file. I reviewed my symptoms. I looked for patterns. I found them. Every change I had documented was a loss of boundary. The ritual that separated my identity from mere function. The hunger that separated me from my machines. The recognition of my own body that separated self from other. The distance I felt from my fellow tech-adepts that separated me from my community. I was losing definition. The clear lines that made me Tertius 9, Sigma were blurring, dissolving into something broader and less distinct. I was decohering. As Sanguinius became more coherent, I was becoming less so. It was as though there was a conservation law at work. A fixed quantity of coherence in this sealed chamber, being redistributed from observer to observed. He was waking. I was fading. We were entangled. This should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a strange peace. Finally, I understood what was happening. Understanding is a kind of comfort, even when what you understand is your own dissolution. The days blurred together. I stopped distinguishing between shifts. I simply was present at the viewing portal, watching, recording, fading. Other tech-adepts came and went. They spoke to me sometimes. I must have answered. They did not report any anomalies in my behavior. Perhaps I was very good at mimicking normalcy. Or perhaps they simply did not care enough to look closely. No one looks closely anymore. Looking closely is how you see things you don't want to see. The power consumption reached 0,087% above baseline, then 0.14%, then 0.23%. The exponential curve was steepening into a wall. Through the quantum imaging, I watched the angel's body achieve full molecular coherence. His cells were synchronized now. His tissues were unified. He existed as a single quantum system, vast and complex, generating interference patterns that I could barely measure. And then, on day 27 of my vigil, I saw his chest move. It was not breathing, not truly. It was the memory of breathing, the pattern of respiration executed at the quantum level before manifesting in the physical. The expansion was 0.703 millimeters. It took 14 seconds to complete, but his chest moved. I stood at that viewing portal for 9 hours, watching that impossibly slow breath, watching the molecules of his lungs remember their function, watching life contemplate returning to a body that had been dead for 10,000 years. My hands were shaking, both of them. Flesh and steel trembled with identical amplitude. When had that become possible? When had my augmetics learned to shake? I could not remember the last time I had felt emotion strongly enough to manifest physically. The memory was gone, deleted, lost in the progressive dissolution of whoever I had been. But I was feeling something now. Something vast and terrible and sacred. I was witnessing a miracle, and miracles are not kind to their witnesses. On day 31, his eyes opened. They did not open like living eyes open. There was no flutter of lids, no gradual lightening of awareness. One moment they were closed. The next moment they were open, a quantum state change. Close to open with no transition state between. His eyes were gold, perfect luminous gold, like molten metal given sentience and purpose. They stared straight ahead, unfocused, seeing nothing. But they were open. I stood frozen at the viewing portal. My respiratory system had ceased to function. My heart had stopped beating. I existed in a moment of pure, crystallized horror and wonder, balanced perfectly between them. The angel's eyes did not move, did not blink. They simply stared at some point infinitely distant, seeing through the walls of his casket, through the vault, through terror itself, into some space that I could not follow. How long did I stand there? I don't know. Time had ceased to have meaning. I existed in a single, eternal instant of observation. Then his eyes moved. They shifted, slowly, microscopically. The quantum imaging showed me the muscles contracting, the tendons pulling, the neural signals firing through pathways that had been dark for 10 millennia. His eyes turned toward the viewing portal. His eyes turned toward me. I ran. I had never run before. Not in 62 years of life, not in 47 years of service. Running was inefficient. Running was emotional. Running was human. I ran like a human. Like a terrified animal fleeing from a predator it could not comprehend. I made it 17 meters before my legs stopped working. I collapsed on the cold stone floor of the vault, my augmetic limbs suddenly refusing commands, my flesh body trembling with an overload of stimuli I had no framework to process. I lay there for 3 hours and 41 minutes. I know this because my chronometer continued functioning even as everything else failed. I watched the numbers increment with a detached fascination. Time was still passing. The universe was still operating according to its laws. These facts seemed important, though I could not articulate why. Eventually, my systems rebooted. I stood. I walked back to my habitation unit. I logged my shift report. All systems nominal. No anomalies detected. The lie had become the truth. This was nominal now. This was normal. The angel was waking, I was fading, and the universe continued indifferent to both processes. I did not return to the vault for 3 days. This was not a decision. I simply found myself unable to enter the chamber. I would approach the entrance, and my body would refuse to continue. Some deep, animal part of my brain had taken control, overriding my conscious will with a survival imperative: do not go back. Do not look again. Do not witness any more than you already have. But I needed to witness. It was the only thing I had left. On the 4th day, I forced myself through the entrance. My hands were shaking again. My respiratory rate was elevated. My hearts beat arrhythmically, producing a staccato rhythm that should have required medical intervention. I did not seek medical intervention. I sought the viewing portal. Casket 1's power consumption had reached 0.047% above baseline. The increase was no longer exponential. It was approaching vertical. Something critical was about to happen. I looked through the viewing portal. The angel was still there, still contained, still technically in stasis. But everything had changed. His body had color now, not the dead, preserved color I had first observed, but something alive. His skin had a warmth to it that transcended temperature. His wings seemed to glow with an inner light that my senses could not quantify. And his eyes. His golden eyes were open, and they were looking directly at the viewing portal. Directly at me. I knew intellectually that he could not see me. The armorglass was one way. The stasis field blocked all information transfer. He was looking at the portal, not through it. But he was looking. And I could not shake the absolute certainty that he knew I was there. I activated my quantum imaging again, needing data, needing numbers, needing something objective to anchor myself to. What I saw made no sense. The angel's quantum wave function extended beyond his body. It leaked through the stasis field like water through a membrane, spreading out into the vault in delicate, fractal patterns. Tendrils of probability reached out from his form, exploring the space around him, testing the boundaries of his confinement, and one tendril reached all the way to where I stood. I watched it on my screen, a thread of quantum coherence connecting Sanguinius's consciousness to my observation point. We were entangled. Literally, physically, entangled at the quantum level. He was using me as an anchor, as a reference point, as a bridge between his state of death and the possibility of life. I was not observing his resurrection. I was participating in it. I should have fled. I should have severed the connection. I should have activated the emergency protocols and sealed the vault forever. I did none of these things. Instead, I spoke. I see you. My voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the vault, it sounded like thunder. The words echoed off ancient walls, bouncing back to me in layers, transforming from statement to question to prayer. The angel did not respond, could not respond. He was still frozen, still bound by the stasis field that had held him for 10,000 years. But his eyes moved. Just slightly. Just enough. He could hear me. I laughed again. That same unstable, uncertain sound. I see you, and you hear me, and neither of us should be possible. What does that make us, angel? What are we becoming? Silence. The vault held its breath. I pressed my hand against the viewing portal. Flesh and armorglass and stasis field separated my palm from his face, but through the quantum imaging, I could see our wave functions intersecting, merging, creating interference patterns of impossible complexity. I was the keeper of the eternal flame. I whispered, for 47 years, I maintained your tome without ever looking inside. I believed that ignorance was a form of reverence. That mystery was sacred. My hand trembled against the glass. But I looked, and I saw you, and I cannot unlook, cannot unknow, cannot return to the faithful servant I was before I witnessed your awakening. I closed my eyes. You are taking something from me, angel. My coherence, my certainty, myself. I am dissolving into you, atom by atom, thought by thought. Soon there will be nothing left of Tertius 9 Sigma, only the witness, only the observation, only the looking. I opened my eyes and met his golden gaze through layers of technology and time. Is this what faith costs? Is this what it means to see divinity? Complete annihilation of the self in service to the witnessed. He did not answer, but his chest rose and fell again, faster now. The breath of the nearly living. I spent the next 17 days at that portal. I did not sleep, did not eat, did not perform any function except observation. The other tech-adepts noticed, finally, that something was wrong. They tried to speak to me, tried to pull me away. I do not remember my responses, but they must have been sufficient because they left me alone. Or perhaps they simply couldn't see me anymore. Perhaps I had faded so much that I existed only in the angel's perception, invisible to normal human eyes. The power draw reached 3% above baseline, then 7%, then 1%. The stasis field was failing, not malfunctioning. The distinction was important. It was failing because it was trying to hold something that could no longer be held. You cannot suspend time around something that exists partially outside of time. On day 47, exactly 47 years after I first began my service in Vault Seraphim, the stasis field collapsed. There was no sound, no light, no dramatic failure. The containment simply stopped, as though the universe had collectively decided that it was no longer necessary. Sanguinius lay in his open casket, breathing. His chest rose and fell with a rhythm that I recognized from my medical training. Approximately 14 breaths per minute. Slower than human normal, faster than death. His heart's beat, I could see the pulse in his throat. Both of them, synchronized, powerful enough to push blood through a body designed for war. But he did not wake, did not stir, did not open his eyes beyond the fixed, golden stare I had first witnessed. He existed in some intermediate state, not dead, not truly alive, suspended between, waiting for something, waiting for the final observer to complete the measurement, waiting for the wave function to fully collapse. I understood what he needed. I entered the authorization code for the casket. My credentials should not have been sufficient. I was third tier. The casket required vault, master authorization at minimum. But the lock opened anyway. Rules bend around miracles. The seal broke with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The lid raised on ancient servos, revealing the angel in full. The smell hit me, that impossible, beautiful scent of ozone and copper and incense. It was real now, measurable. The atmospheric sensors screamed alarms as foreign particulates flooded the environment. I ignored them. I stepped forward. I stood over the body of a Primarch. He was magnificent. Even in this half-death, even in this state of becoming, he radiated a presence that made my augmetic heart ache. His armor was scorched and torn, bearing the marks of his final battle with Horus aboard the vengeful spirit. His wings were broken, feathers bent and bloodied. But his face, Emperor's mercy, his face was serene, beautiful, perfect in a way that denied the violence of his death. I reached out. My hand, flesh, not steel, hovered over his chest, over the place where Horus had struck him down, where the greatest betrayal in human history had ended the life of the Emperor's most beloved son. I see you, I whispered again. I witness your return. I complete the observation. Wake, angel. Wake and tell me what I have become in watching you become. My hand descended. Flesh touched armor. The contact point generated a quantum cascade that my sensors could barely track. Our wave functions merged completely, forming a unified system, a single entity composed of Primarch and tech-adept, divinity and witness, observed and observer. I felt myself disappear. It was not painful. It was not violent. It was simply complete. The dissolution I had been experiencing for 47 days reached its conclusion. Tertius 9 Sigma ceased to be a discrete entity and became instead a function, a process, a necessary variable in the equation of resurrection. The angel's eyes focused. He saw me. Not the viewing portal, not the casket, not the vault, me. The dissolving ghost of who I had been, the quantum shadow still clinging to the edge of existence. He spoke. His voice was like bronze bells, like thunder over distant mountains, like the music that plays when stars are born. I know you, witness. I know what you have given, what you have become. I tried to respond, found that I had no voice, no body, no independent existence. I was echo now, reflection, the memory of observation preserved in the quantum foam of reality. You gave yourself so that I might return. The angel continued. You dissolved the boundary between us so that I could cross from death to life. This is the price of resurrection. This is the cost of miracle. His hand, massive, armored, impossibly gentle, reached up and passed through where my chest should have been. I felt it, somehow. Felt the touch of divinity on my fragmenting consciousness. I will remember you, he said. When I walk among the faithful again, when I take up my sword in the Emperor's name, I will carry the memory of Tertius 9, Sigma, who sacrificed certainty for witness, who dissolved himself in the observation of the divine. His eyes were so sad, so infinitely sad. This is what it means to see us truly. We cannot be observed without cost. We are too vast, too fundamental. To witness us is to become part of us, and there is no self that survives that union intact. I wanted to tell him it was worth it, that I regretted nothing, that the dissolution was a fair price for 47 days of true purpose. But I had no words, no thoughts, only the fading awareness that I had been, and now I was becoming, and soon I would simply be, without the I, without the becoming, only the state itself. The angel sat up, his wings spread. Broken feathers fell like snow, each one containing enough genetic material to spawn 1,000 suns. He stood. His armor groaned with the movement, systems that had been dormant for 10 millennia reactivating, remembering their purpose. He stepped out of the casket. His feet touched the floor of the vault for the first time in recorded history. The impact registered on seismic sensors throughout Terra. Later, I would learn that the custodian guard felt it in their bones, that the Emperor himself stirred on the golden throne, that every psyker on the planet cried out in languages not spoken since humanity's birth. But I experienced it as a simple fact. The angel was walking. I was fading. These were equivalent truths. He walked to the vault entrance, stopped, turned back to look at the space where I had been. Go gently into the silence, witness. Your observation is complete. Your purpose is fulfilled. Rest in the certainty that you were seen in return. Then he was gone, moving with a speed that my failing sensors could not track. Out of the vault, out of my perception, into whatever destiny awaited a Primarch reborn in an Imperium that had learned to survive without him. I remained, or rather, the quantum shadow of me remained, anchored to casket 1 by entanglement, by purpose, by the simple fact that I had spent 47 years maintaining this tomb and 47 days destroying it. Time became uncertain. Hours, days, years. The distinction was meaningless without coherent consciousness to measure them. Other tech-adepts came. I watched them through layers of probability, through the fog of my own dissolution. They found the open casket. They panicked. They reported. The vault master arrived. Then the custodian guard. Then others whose titles I could not focus on. They searched for evidence, for explanations, for the culprit who had committed this impossible heresy. They found nothing, because I had left nothing, no data logs, no DNA evidence, no recorded confession. I had erased myself as thoroughly from their records as I had from my own existence. Eventually, they sealed the vault. They removed casket 1. They performed rites of purification and rededication. They assigned new tech-adepts to maintain the remaining dead, and I remained, a quantum ghost, an observer without body, a witness without self. I watched the new tech-adepts perform their duties, watched them walk past the empty space where casket 1 had been, watched them recite their prayers with genuine faith, still whole, still coherent, still believing that observation and self were separable states. I envied them. But I could not hate them. They did not know what I knew. They had not looked. Sometimes I wondered if the angel remembered me, as he promised. If my name was ever spoken in the councils of the reborn. If my sacrifice was recorded anywhere except in the quantum fluctuations of an empty vault. But these thoughts were brief, fleeting, the shadow of questions, not questions themselves. Mostly I simply existed, a persistent pattern in the probability space. A measurement that had collapsed one wave, function and generated another. A witness that had witnessed itself into obsolescence. I was the keeper of the eternal flame. I let it become me, and felt only the silence after burning. What is a guardian who no longer guards, who no longer exists, who is only the memory of observation frozen in quantum amber? I was faith. I was duty. I was the sacred act of not looking that became the heresy of looking, that became the annihilation of the looker. I was Tertius 9 Sigma. The vault is silent now. The dead remain dead. The living move through their rituals, maintaining, preserving, believing. And I remain, the echo of the witness, the shadow of the observer, the quantum ghost that paid the price of seeing divinity and lived, if this is living, to testify to the cost. If you are reading this, if somehow this testimony has survived the dissolution of its author, know this. Do not look upon angels lightly. Do not witness the impossible and expect to remain yourself. Do not believe that observation is passive, neutral, safe. I looked, I saw, I was consumed. And the angel walks terror again. Was it worth it? Ask me when I remember what worth means. Ask me when I cohere enough to understand questions. Ask me when the silence between thoughts becomes something other than the only thing I am. Until then, I remain. Witness, echo, ghost, the price of resurrection, paid in full. The answer to a question I can no longer remember asking. The observation that observed itself into silence. I was here. I watched. Now I am only the watching only.